The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 6 days without a break, and the ancient beings who ruled the galaxy were experiencing something they had not felt in thousands of years. Panic was spreading through the chamber, as representatives from hundreds of species tried to understand how a Category 7 civilization had created a crisis that threatened to destroy the legal foundation of galactic society. Council legal advisor Mordan stood before the assembled representatives, with documents floating around him in holographic displays. The elderly being had spent his entire career studying galactic law and had never encountered a situation that the legal codes could not handle. Now he faced a problem that seemed to have no solution within the existing framework. Mordan explained to the council that humanity had created what legal scholars called a cascade failure, where different laws contradicted each other in impossible ways. If the council declared war on humanity to retrieve their captured personnel, they would be acknowledging humans as legitimate military opponents, which would automatically elevate them beyond Category 7 status. If they abandoned their captured soldiers and officers, they would violate fundamental council laws about protecting the lives and welfare of all galactic citizens. If they negotiated with humans as equals, they would set a precedent that could encourage other species to challenge the classification system that had maintained order for 50 millennia. Counselor Prime Thekamaran listened to the debate with growing concern. The ancient being had helped write many of the original laws and had never imagined that they could be used against the council itself. Every option available seemed to lead to consequences that would weaken or destroy the authority structure that kept the galaxy peaceful. Meanwhile, on human space stations scattered throughout the solar system, the captured alien crews were experiencing something equally unprecedented. They were being treated as guests rather than prisoners, and were free to move around human facilities under minimal supervision. Many aliens had never seen anything like human society, where individuals could question authority and make their own choices. Dr. Amy Thompson continued her interviews with alien personnel and discovered that the rigid council hierarchy had suppressed not just individual freedom but also technological and cultural innovation. Most species had remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years because their societies discouraged the kind of creative thinking that led to advancement. Silandra, the young Zephyrian officer, had become an unofficial spokesperson for the growing group of aliens who were fascinated by human concepts of personal liberty and self-determination. She spent hours talking with human scientists and philosophers about ideas that were forbidden or unknown in her own culture. The breakthrough came when Captain Tony Martinez proposed something that no galactic civilization had ever attempted. Instead of treating the captured aliens as prisoners to be exchanged, he suggested creating a voluntary cultural ambassadorship program where aliens could choose to stay and learn about human society, or return home with new knowledge about alternative ways of organizing civilization. Tony had been working with the alien prisoners for weeks and had noticed that many of them seemed reluctant to return to societies where they would have no opportunity to use what they had learned about human culture. Some aliens had expressed interest in staying permanently, while others wanted to go home but take human ideas with them. The proposal created immediate controversy among both humans and aliens. Many human military leaders worried that allowing aliens to remain on human worlds posed security risks. Some aliens feared that their own governments would punish them for being contaminated by human ideas about individual rights and democratic decision-making. Dr. Thompson supported the program after discovering that several alien species had underground movements that secretly questioned council authority but had never had alternatives to consider. She believed that exposing aliens to human values could create positive changes throughout galactic society, rather than simply resolving the immediate crisis. Admiral Katie Bell agreed to implement the program on a trial basis with careful monitoring of both human security concerns and alien welfare. She established protocols that allowed aliens to communicate freely with their home worlds while also protecting sensitive human military information from potential intelligence gathering. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within weeks of implementation, dozens of alien officers had requested permission to extend their stays and learn more about human government and technology. Even more surprising was the response from alien homeworlds, where news of the cultural exchange program was spreading through channels the council could not control. Silandra made contact with other young Zephyrians who were tired of their society's rigid traditions and wanted to explore new possibilities. Through quantum communication networks that humans should not have been able to access, she began sharing human concepts of individual rights and technological innovation with aliens across the galaxy. Similar connections formed between human facilities and dissident groups on dozens of alien worlds. Species that had been silent for centuries began questioning why they were locked into predetermined social roles, and why their civilizations had stopped growing and changing thousands of years ago. The Council watched in horror as their carefully maintained order began to unravel. 17 star systems declared independence from Council authority and announced their intention to establish direct diplomatic relations with humanity. 3. Major trade routes were disrupted by species demanding reclassification to higher categories or complete freedom from the hierarchy system. Most shocking of all was the response from younger generations of aliens who had grown up accepting the Council system as natural and unchangeable. Across the galaxy, young beings began organizing protests and demonstrations demanding the right to choose their own futures rather than accepting roles assigned by ancient laws. Council enforcement fleets found themselves unable to respond effectively because many of their own crews had been exposed to human ideas through captured personnel who had been returned home. Alien soldiers began questioning orders, and some even refused to participate in actions against species seeking independence. Dr. Kevin Walsh continued studying galactic law from his position as humanity's legal advisor, and discovered that the Council's own founding documents contained principles that supported many of the changes that humans and their alien allies were demanding. The original laws had been written to promote growth and cooperation, but had been interpreted over time to justify stagnation and control. Elena Rodriguez worked with alien dissidents to draft new legal frameworks that could replace the classification system with more flexible arrangements based on voluntary association and mutual benefit. These documents began circulating through underground networks faster than the Council could suppress them. The crisis reached its peak when Councillor Zarthul of the Hegemony proposed using devastating weapons to destroy Earth and eliminate the source of galactic instability. Several other Council members supported this option, arguing that preserving order was more important than protecting individual species that threatened the common good. Councillor Prime Thek Maran rejected the proposal not out of concern for human lives, but because destroying Earth would create martyrs and prove to the entire galaxy that the Council maintained power through fear rather than wisdom. The ancient being realized that using overwhelming force would only accelerate the collapse of galactic authority. Instead, Thek Maran proposed something that had not happened in 50,000 years. The Council would invite human representatives to participate in formal negotiations about restructuring galactic law, to address the legitimate concerns raised by humanity and their growing number of alien supporters. The invitation was carefully worded to avoid acknowledging humans as equals, while still opening the door to meaningful discussions about changing the legal framework that governed galactic civilization. For the first time in millennia, the Council was admitting that their laws might need to be modified rather than simply enforced. Elena Rodriguez received the invitation while meeting with alien dissidents on a space station near Mars. She realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had forced the most powerful civilization in the galaxy to consider fundamental changes to laws that had seemed eternal and unchangeable. The negotiations would be dangerous because the Council could still choose violence if they decided that accommodation was impossible. But for the first time, humans had hope that they might achieve recognition as equals without having to fight, a war that could destroy both Earth and countless alien worlds. Elena began preparing for the most important diplomatic mission in human history, knowing that the future of freedom in the galaxy depended on what happened in the coming negotiations. Fleet Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching 200 warships from 12 different species move through space toward the human home system. The enforcement fleet was the largest military force assembled in over 1,000 years and represented the combined might of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Kethvar felt confident that the humans would surrender as soon as they saw what they were facing. The Admiral had commanded enforcement actions before against species that tried to defy Council authority. Usually the mere sight of a dozen alien warships was enough to make rebellious worlds reconsider their position. No Category 7 species had ever possessed weapons that could threaten Council vessels, and most surrendered without firing a single shot. Kethvar expected the humans to follow the same pattern. His intelligence reports indicated that humanity had only primitive nuclear weapons and simple chemical rockets. Even their most advanced military technology was thousands of years behind what the Council considered basic equipment. The enforcement action should be over within hours of arrival. When the fleet reached the edge of the human solar system, Kethvar was surprised to find a small group of human ships waiting for them near Neptune. There were only 30 human vessels against his 200, but they did not retreat or attempt to hide. Instead, they moved into a defensive formation that suggested they actually intended to fight. Admiral Katie Bell commanded the human defense fleet from her flagship, the UES Defiance. She had studied every piece of intelligence Earth possessed about alien technology and tactics. Katie knew that humanity was outnumbered and outgunned, but she also knew that humans had advantages the aliens did not expect. The human ships looked primitive compared to the sleek alien vessels, but appearances could be deceiving. Human engineers had been working around the clock since the Zephyrian encounter to develop new technologies based on captured alien sensor readings. The results were experimental and dangerous, but they might be enough to level the playing field. Lieutenant Ben Foster piloted one of the new experimental fighters that had been built in secret in the asteroid belt. His ship was smaller than most alien shuttles, but it carried weapons and defensive systems that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Ben had volunteered for the mission knowing that his fighter might explode the first time he activated its main systems. The battle began when Kethvar ordered his ships to advance and demanded human surrender. Katie responded by launching her fighters and ordering her larger ships to spread out into a formation the aliens had never seen before. Instead of grouping together for mutual protection, the human ships scattered across a huge area of space. Ben's fighter engaged 3 alien escort vessels that moved to intercept the human formation. The alien ships fired energy weapons that should have destroyed the small human craft instantly, but Ben's fighter simply disappeared from their sensors. The experimental phase drive allowed his ship to exist slightly outside normal space for short periods, making it nearly impossible to target. Ben reappeared inside the formation of alien ships and fired weapons that the aliens did not recognize. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, Ben's fighter launched devices that attached to alien hulls and disrupted their power systems. The 3 escort vessels found themselves dead in space with all systems failing, while Ben's fighter phased back to safety. Captain Danny Wright commanded the destroyer UES Defiance and watched the alien fleet trying to understand what had happened to their escort ships. Danny had been given one of the most dangerous assignments in the human fleet. His ship carried an experimental weapons system that could phase through alien shields but might also tear his ship apart if something went wrong. Danny waited until a massive alien dreadnought moved close enough to his position, then activated the phase cannon. The weapon created a temporary tunnel through space that allowed Danny's ship to fire from inside the alien vessel's defensive shields. The dreadnought's crew watched in horror as human weapons materialized inside their own ship and began destroying critical systems from within. The alien fleet was thrown into confusion as more human ships demonstrated impossible capabilities. Human vessels appeared and disappeared without warning. Human weapons bypassed alien defenses in ways that violated known physics. Most shocking of all, the humans seemed to be fighting with tactics designed not just to win battles, but to capture enemy ships intact. Kethvar realized that every piece of intelligence the Council possessed about human capabilities was wrong. These were not primitive beings with simple weapons. The humans were using advanced technology that the Admiral could not understand, and fighting with a level of innovation that caught the alien forces completely off guard. The turning point came when Katie Bell ordered a coordinated assault on Kethvar's flagship. 20 human ships surrounded the massive alien vessel and began using phase weapons to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The flagship's shields were designed to stop attacks from outside, but could not defend against weapons that materialized inside the protective barrier. Captain Wright led the boarding action that captured the alien flagship. His Marines used the same phase technology that powered their weapons to walk through the ship's hull and appear directly on the bridge. The alien crew found themselves facing armed humans who seemed to materialize from thin air and who moved through the ship like ghosts. Kethvar was taken prisoner along with his entire command staff and most of his crew. The admiral could not understand how primitive humans had captured the most advanced warship in the galactic fleet. Even more confusing was the fact that the humans treated their prisoners with respect and provided medical care for wounded aliens. The human Marines were led by Sergeant Tony Martinez, who had trained specifically for boarding actions against alien vessels. Tony made sure that captured aliens were fed and given proper quarters, while human medics treated their injuries. This behavior was completely unprecedented in galactic military history, where defeated enemies were usually either destroyed or left to die. Katie broadcast a message to the remaining alien ships telling them that their admiral and crew were safe and being treated according to human military regulations. She offered to return the prisoners in exchange for immediate withdrawal of all council forces from human space. The alien fleet commanders had never encountered a situation like this and had no idea how to respond. The captured aliens were amazed by their treatment at human hands. Most galactic species viewed prisoners as either resources to be exploited or problems to be eliminated. The idea that an enemy would provide medical care and comfortable quarters for captured soldiers was so foreign that many aliens thought it must be some kind of trick. Dr. Amy Thompson was assigned to interview the alien prisoners and learn about their cultures and motivations. She discovered that most of the alien soldiers had never questioned the Council's authority because questioning was discouraged or forbidden in their societies. Many had joined the military because it was the only way to advance in rigid social hierarchies. A young Zephyrian officer named Silandra told Dr. Thompson that she had dreamed of exploring new worlds and meeting different species. Instead, she found herself enforcing laws that prevented the very exploration and contact she craved. Silandra had never considered that there might be alternatives to the Council's way of doing things until she met humans who lived by completely different rules. Katie Bell sent another message to the galactic community, announcing that humanity was willing to return all prisoners through a voluntary exchange program. Any alien who wanted to go home would be transported safely to Council space. Any alien who wanted to learn about human society would be welcome to stay as a guest rather than a prisoner. The response from the Galactic Council was swift and predictable. They declared the human actions to be war crimes and demanded immediate return of all captured personnel. They threatened to send larger fleets and use more devastating weapons if humans did not surrender immediately. Katie responded by sending the Council detailed medical reports showing that all alien prisoners were healthy and being treated well. She included video messages from prisoners themselves confirming their good treatment and expressing curiosity about human culture and values. The Council found itself facing an impossible situation. If they escalated the conflict, they risked the lives of their own people who were being held by humans. If they negotiated, they would be acknowledging humans as equals, which would undermine the entire classification system. If they abandoned their personnel, they would violate their own laws about protecting Council citizens. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Galactic Council had no idea what to do next. 3 months after the Discovery's encounter with the Zephyrians, Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stepped off a transport ship onto the biggest structure humans had ever seen. Nexus Prime was a space station the size of a small moon that served as the headquarters for the Galactic Council. The station was so large that it had its own weather, and Elena could see clouds forming in the artificial sky above her head. Colonel Sam Parker walked beside Elena, carrying a case full of military reports and tactical analyses. He was there to advise Elena about galactic military capabilities and to show the aliens that humanity took their threats seriously. Dr. Kevin Walsh followed behind them with several bags full of legal documents and precedent studies that he hoped would help humanity's case. The 3 humans were escorted through corridors that seemed to stretch forever by a silent alien guide that looked like a walking tree. Elena had studied the files on dozens of different species, but seeing them in person was still overwhelming. Every few minutes they passed beings that were so strange she could barely understand how they could be alive. The council chamber was bigger than any building Elena had ever been inside. The ceiling was so high that she could not see the top of it, and the walls curved away into the distance like they were inside a giant sphere. Seats were arranged in levels that rose up from the center floor, with the most important species sitting highest and the least important sitting lowest. Elena and her team were given seats on the very bottom level, along with representatives from other young species that the Council considered unimportant. Above them sat hundreds of different aliens in a careful order that had not changed for thousands of years. The beings at the top looked down at everyone else like gods watching mortals. Counselor, Prime Thekmaran, sat at the very highest point in a throne that seemed to be made of solid light. The ancient being was so old that some said it had been alive when the first laws were written. Its voice echoed through the chamber without any need for technology, and every word carried the weight of ages. Elena was given permission to speak, but only after dozens of other species had presented their cases for various small matters. She realized that the Council was making humans wait on purpose to show them how unimportant they were in the galactic order. When her turn finally came, Elena walked to the center of the chamber and looked up at the hundreds of aliens staring down at her. Dr. Walsh had prepared a careful legal argument about why Law 847 Delta violated principles of self-determination and equal treatment. He had found examples in galactic law where species had been given chances to prove themselves rather than being classified based on assumptions. Elena presented these arguments clearly and logically, while Kevin provided supporting evidence from his research. The Council listened to Elena's presentation with what seemed like amusement. Several of the aliens made sounds that might have been laughter, while others simply ignored her completely. When she finished speaking, Counselor Zarthul of the Hegemony responded with condescending patience like an adult explaining simple facts to a child. Zarthul told Elena that Law 847 Delta had kept peace in the galaxy for over 50,000 years. The law existed because young species were always too aggressive and unpredictable to be trusted with advanced technology or access to galactic civilization. Every time the Council had made exceptions, terrible things had happened. The alien pointed to a holographic display that showed the destruction of an entire star system. Zarthul explained that 12,000 years ago, a species called the Draconians had been given too much freedom too quickly. They had tried to conquer their neighbors, and the resulting war had destroyed billions of lives and made several worlds uninhabitable forever. Other Council members shared similar stories of young species that had caused problems when they were not properly controlled. They talked about races that had developed weapons of mass destruction and used them on their own people. They described civilizations that had polluted their worlds beyond repair or started wars over resources they could have shared peacefully. Counselor Prime Thekmaran spoke last, and its words carried the authority of ages. The ancient being explained that the Council had learned through painful experience that peace required structure, and structure required hierarchy. Species had to earn their place in galactic civilization by proving they could be trusted with power and responsibility. The Council offered humanity what they called a compromise. Instead of remaining at Category 7, humans could be elevated to Category 6 status. This would allow limited travel to nearby star systems and access to some basic galactic technologies. Humans would be allowed to trade for certain approved goods and could send small numbers of students to learn from more advanced species. Several Council members spoke about how generous this offer was and how grateful other species had been to receive such consideration. They pointed out that Category 6 status usually took centuries to achieve, and humanity was being offered a chance to skip ahead because of their potential for growth. Elena listened to the offer carefully and discussed it quietly with Sam and Kevin. The compromise would give humanity more than they had before, but would still leave them as junior partners in a system they had no voice in creating. Humans would be allowed to exist at the pleasure of species that considered them children, who needed constant supervision. When Elena spoke again, her voice was calm, but her words were like ice. She thanked the Council for their offer, but explained that humanity had not come to Nexus Prime to beg for scraps from their table. Humans had come to inform the Council that they would take their place among the stars with or without galactic permission. The chamber became completely silent. Elena continued speaking and told the assembled aliens that the only question was whether they would work with humanity as equals or find themselves dealing with humans as opponents. She said that her species had not survived ice ages and wars and plagues and the long journey to the stars just to become pets in someone else's empire. Sam stepped forward and added that humanity had already begun expanding into space and would continued to do so regardless of council approval. Kevin presented evidence that many of the council's own laws supported the right of species to defend themselves and determine their own futures. Elena concluded by saying that humanity wanted to be friends with the galactic community, but would not accept slavery disguised as protection. She told the council that humans were willing to prove themselves through actions rather than words, but they would do so as free beings making their own choices. Counselor Prime. Thekmaran leaned forward in its throne of light and studied Elena for a long moment. The ancient being seemed genuinely puzzled by humanity's response, as if it could not understand why any species would choose uncertainty over guaranteed safety. The council members began talking among themselves in dozens of different languages while Elena and her team waited. Finally, Thekmaran announced that the council would consider humanity's position and respond appropriately. The tone made it clear that the response would not be what humans wanted to hear. Elena and her team were escorted back to their quarters while the council continued its deliberations. Sam checked his secure communications and found messages from Earth confirming that human military forces were preparing for the worst. Kevin continued studying galactic law, looking for any precedent that might help their cause. That night, Elena stood at the window of her quarters looking out at the stars and wondering if she had just started a war that humanity could not win. The UES Discovery drifted through the dark space near Jupiter when the sensors started screaming warnings at Captain Jake Morrison. He sat in his command chair looking at screens that showed something impossible floating ahead of them. The object was huge and made of what looked like crystal but moved like it was alive. Jake had been exploring space for 15 years, but had never seen anything like this before. Dr. Lisa Carter ran onto the bridge with her tablet in her hands. She was breathing hard and her eyes were wide with excitement. She had been studying the readings from her lab and could not believe what the computers were telling her. The crystal ship was not made by humans and it was not empty. There were living things inside it. Commander Ryan Brooks moved his hands over the weapon controls, but did not fire. Jake had told his crew many times that if they ever met aliens, they should try to talk first and shoot only if they had to. Ryan was a good soldier, but he was also smart enough to know that starting a war with beings who could build ships like that would be very bad for humanity. The crystal ship moved closer to the Discovery, and Jake could see lights moving inside, it like fireflies in a jar. The alien ship was 10 times bigger than his vessel and seemed to bend space around it in ways that made his head hurt to look at. Jake opened a communication channel and spoke into his microphone, hoping the aliens could understand human language. A voice answered him, but it did not come from the speakers. Instead, the voice seemed to come from inside his own head and the heads of everyone on the bridge. The voice was cold and sounded like it thought humans were children who needed to be taught a lesson. The alien called itself High Arbiter Veltaros and said it represented something called the Zephyrian Confederacy. Veltaros told Jake that his ship would be boarded for evaluation and that humans should prepare to receive important information about their place in the galaxy. The alien spoke like it was doing humanity a great favor by even talking to them. Jake tried to refuse the boarding, but the crystal ship simply moved next to the Discovery and somehow made an opening appear in both ships that connected them together. The alien technology was so advanced that human shields and armor meant nothing at all. 3 beings floated through the connection and onto the human bridge. The aliens looked like they were made of the same crystal as their ship, but they moved and spoke like living creatures. They had no faces that humans could recognize, but they seemed to see everything perfectly. High Arbiter Veltaros was taller than the other 2 and had patterns of light moving under its crystal skin. Lisa tried to be polite and asked questions about Zephyrian culture and technology, but the aliens ignored her completely. They were not interested in learning about humans at all. Instead, they walked around the bridge looking at human equipment like they were examining tools made by primitive cave dwellers. Veltaros began speaking again, and its words made Jake's blood run cold. The alien explained that humanity had been watched and studied for some time without humans knowing it. The Galactic Council had many laws about how to deal with new species, and humans fell into a category called Category 7 Primitive Species, under something called Law 847 Delta. This law meant that humans were not allowed to leave their home solar system or trade with other species or participate in galactic politics. The aliens said this was for humanity's own protection, because the galaxy was too complex and dangerous for such a young and violent species to understand. Ryan stepped forward and asked what would happen if humans refused to accept these restrictions. The three aliens looked at each other in a way that seemed like they were laughing without making any sound. They explained that no species had ever refused before because the alternative was something they called enforcement measures, which sounded very much like war. Veltaros told Jake that the Zephyrians were prepared to offer humanity a standard protection package. This included basic medical technology that could cure most human diseases and agricultural improvements that could end hunger on Earth. In exchange, humans would give the aliens mining rights to Earth's moon and asteroid belt, and promise to stay within their own solar system forever. The alien made it clear that this was not really a choice. Either humans accepted the deal or the Galactic Council would use force to make sure humans stayed where they belonged. Veltaros said that many species had been given the same offer over the centuries, and all of them had been grateful for the Council's wisdom and protection. Jake looked around his bridge at his crew. Lisa was angry that the aliens refused to treat humans as equals. Ryan was calculating how long human defenses could hold against alien technology. The other crew members looked scared, but also determined not to give up their freedom without a fight. Jake stood up from his command chair and looked directly at High Arbiter Veltaros. He spoke slowly and clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. He told the alien that humanity appreciated the offer, but would have to decline. Humans would decide their own future and make their own choices about where to go and what to. The three aliens became very still, and the lights under their crystal skin stopped moving. Veltaros asked Jake to repeat what he had said because surely no intelligent species would choose conflict over the generous protection being offered. Jake repeated his refusal and added that humans looked forward to meeting other species as equals rather than as subjects. Veltaros told Jake that his decision was illogical and dangerous. The alien warned that the Galactic Council would be informed of humanity's aggressive and irrational response to their generous offer. The Council would then decide what enforcement measures were necessary to protect both humans and the rest of the galaxy from human recklessness. The three aliens left the Discovery as suddenly as they had arrived. Their crystal ship moved away and disappeared into the darkness between stars. Jake knew that humanity had just made either the best decision or the worst mistake in its entire history. Time would tell which one it was. 6 months after the first shots were fired between human and Council forces, the largest gathering in galactic history assembled at Nexus Prime. Representatives from over 2,000 species attended, including many civilizations that had not participated in Council affairs for centuries. The massive station had been expanded to accommodate delegates from worlds that most beings thought were extinct or mythical. President Claire Davis walked through corridors that had been completely redesigned since her last visit to the station. The hierarchical architecture that had emphasized Council authority for 50,000 years had been replaced with circular arrangements where no species sat higher than any other. The change was symbolic, but it represented a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization understood itself. Claire was accompanied by Admiral Katie Bell, who had become a legend throughout the galaxy for defeating the enforcement fleet without killing a single enemy soldier. Dr. Kevin Walsh carried documents that outlined humanity's proposal for restructuring galactic law, while Elena Rodriguez handled diplomatic communications with the hundreds of alien delegations that had requested meetings. The most significant change was the presence of former prisoners who had volunteered to serve as character witnesses for humanity. Silandra had become the unofficial leader of what galactic media called the Liberation Movement and represented thousands of young aliens who wanted to build a different kind of galactic society. The council chamber itself had been transformed from a temple of authority into something that resembled a democratic assembly. Species were seated based on their choice to participate rather than their assigned classification level. For the first time in recorded history, beings from Category 7 worlds sat next to representatives of the most ancient and powerful civilizations. Counselor Prime Thekamaran occupied a position at the same level as other delegates, rather than looking down from a throne of light. The ancient being had agreed to the changes reluctantly after realizing that maintaining the old hierarchy would result in civil war across dozens of star systems. The opening ceremony was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of council leaders proclaiming their authority and wisdom, representatives from different species shared stories about their hopes for the future. Young aliens spoke about dreams they had never been allowed to express, while older beings admitted mistakes they had made in supporting systems that suppressed growth and change. Claire Davis was given the honor of presenting humanity's vision for galactic civilization. She spoke about concepts that were familiar to humans but revolutionary to most aliens, including individual rights, democratic participation, voluntary association, and the belief that diversity created strength rather than chaos. The speech that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Counselor Prime Thekmaran rose from its seat and addressed the assembly with words that no one thought they would ever hear from such an ancient and conservative being. The counselor admitted that the council had made a fundamental error in assuming that peace required stagnation and order demanded the suppression of individual choice. Thekmaran told the assembly that humanity had forced the galaxy to confront uncomfortable truths about the price of their long peace. While the council system had prevented major wars, it had also prevented the growth and development that made life meaningful for most sentient beings. The ancient being acknowledged that younger species and younger generations within older species had legitimate grievances against laws that locked them into predetermined roles for their entire existence. Thekmaran said that perhaps the council had mistaken fear for wisdom and control for leadership. Dr. Walsh presented the legal framework that would replace the classification system with what became known as the Humanity Doctrine. Instead of assigning species to permanent categories based on assumptions about their capabilities, the new system would evaluate civilizations based on their actual achievements and allow them to advance through voluntary participation in galactic institutions. The doctrine established principles of self-determination that allowed species to choose their own forms of government and social organization, while still maintaining standards for participation in galactic trade and diplomacy. Species could earn greater privileges and responsibilities through demonstrated competence, rather than being trapped in classifications assigned by others. Most importantly, the new framework created mechanisms for peaceful change and growth that had been impossible under the rigid council system. Species could propose modifications to galactic law and participate in democratic processes that gave them real influence over decisions that affected their futures. The negotiations took weeks as hundreds of species debated the details of how the new system would work. Some older civilizations resisted changes that would reduce their privileged status, while younger species demanded immediate elevation to full participation rights. The breakthrough came when Silandra proposed a gradual transition that would allow time for adjustment, while still guaranteeing progress toward the new system. Species would be given clear standards to meet and reasonable timeframes for meeting them. Those who achieved the standards would gain access to advanced technology and full participation in galactic institutions. Admiral Bell addressed military concerns by proposing a new approach to galactic security based on cooperative defense rather than enforcement actions. Instead of powerful species imposing their will on weaker ones, the new system would rely on mutual assistance agreements and shared responsibility for maintaining peace. The signing ceremony for the new Galactic Compact took place in the same chamber where humanity had first been told to accept permanent subjugation. Claire Davis signed the historic document alongside representatives from hundreds of species who had chosen freedom over the false security of eternal stagnation. Claire spoke the words that would be remembered across the galaxy for thousands of years. She said that humanity had not come to join the galactic community, but to help it remember what it was always meant to be. The galaxy was not meant to be a prison where species were locked into permanent hierarchies, but a place where all sentient beings could grow and achieve their full potential. The ceremony concluded with something that had never happened before in galactic history. Species from across the galaxy joined together to sing songs of hope and freedom in hundreds of different languages, while their representatives signed agreements to work together as equals rather than masters and subjects. The aftermath of the new Galactic Compact exceeded even the most optimistic human expectations. Within months of its signing, technological and cultural innovation exploded across the galaxy, as species that had been suppressed for millennia began exploring new possibilities. Trade relationships developed between worlds that had never been allowed to communicate directly. Scientific discoveries accelerated as researchers from different species shared knowledge that had been restricted under the old system. Art and literature flourished as beings expressed ideas that had been forbidden for thousands of years. Not all changes were smooth or immediate. Some older species struggled to adapt to systems that required them to earn respect, rather than simply commanding it through ancient authority. Several star systems experienced political upheaval as populations demanded democratic reforms that their governments were reluctant to implement. But the overall transformation was remarkable. The galaxy that had been frozen in an artificial peace for 50,000 years began growing and changing in ways that created real prosperity and genuine cooperation between species that had previously been isolated from each other. The final scene showed human ships launching toward distant stars, no longer alone, but accompanied by vessels from dozens of species who had chosen to explore the galaxy together. Earth had become the center of a new kind of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Children of different species grew up learning about each other's cultures and working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. Scientists made discoveries that advanced the understanding of all species, while artists created works that celebrated the diversity that made galactic civilization beautiful. The age of enforced peace had ended, and the age of chosen cooperation had begun. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy, but had shown it how to be free. The future belonged to all species working together to build something better than any of them could achieve alone.